This is really kind of my pet passion topic. And I think the reason why is that our guts are doing something really interesting these days. You know, when your digestive tract works, it's never on your mind. You don't think about it. Like, you don't actually think about it. You're like, ooh, this is a lovely dinner. You're not like, so I wonder how my stomach is, churning the chyme right now. But when your gut stops working, it's really hard to think about anything else. And yet the interesting challenge that we throw on top of that is that this isn't necessarily polite dinner time conversation. You're not sitting around the water cooler and be like, you know what? My poops aren't so good these days. How are yours? And so a lot of people think that they might be totally alone in this. A lot of people think that because it's taken them so long to try and find answers and they're still not feeling well, that maybe those answers don't exist. So I'm here to tell you that while it's not always simple, while your route to good digestive health can sometimes be very circuitous, it is actually possible, no matter what's going on with you right now, to get to better. If not 100% perfect, it is possible to get to better. And so I'm really passionate about teaching people a little bit more about the importance of the gut in overall health. Because when I was in school, we learned about just the incredible task that the gut has in physically breaking down everything that you eat and drink into absorbable components, because that's what you make your body out of. You know, when we say you are what you eat, you truly are. You know, every component, every mineral, every vitamin, every, little amino acid or, molecule of sugar is used by your body to build and repair and fuel itself through this crazy life we live. But I didn't actually learn a ton about some of the things I'm going to talk about here today. And so we're going to introduce the concept of the second brain. Who's heard of that idea, that your gut is your second brain? Yeah, awesome. And we're going to also talk about the residents of that second brain, so your gut bacteria or your microbiota. Then, of course, because I'm a dietitian, we're going to talk about how you can feed yourself in a way that also benefits all those little residents hanging out in the dark recesses of your colon. And a little bit about supplementation, because it's something that I get asked a lot about. And then finally, we're going to take a really holistic view of how to nourish your gut-brain connection. Because as a dietitian, I wish that I could say that it is 100% nutrition and that's all you have to do and it's gonna fix everything 100% of the time. But when it comes to your gut, it's really important to nourish your mental well-being as well as your body as a whole, because that has a very distinct impact on how your gut operates. So there's this incredible book, like the kind of like watershed book that really started me thinking about our guts in a different way, was called The Second Brain, by a physician called Michael Gershon. And he didn't make these new discoveries, but he started looking at this idea that there is a very developed nervous system in your gut. It's called the enteric nervous system. And your enteric nervous system is so complex that it actually has more neurons, which are the nerve cells that carry the messages in your nervous system. It has more neurons than your spinal cord. And the way these neurons interact and the way they innervate the gut makes it actually semi-autonomous. Like, if you were to sever the connection between your brain and your gut, you could actually see your gut kind of happily doing its thing all by itself. Think about just putting a gut on like a lab table and just watching it kind of like pulsate. Like, that's kind of creepy, right? It really does have a mind of its own. And further to that is how nerve cells actually relay messages. So it's not just about the cell itself. The nerve cells don't actually touch each other, and they actually communicate between the two with what we call neurotransmitters. So these are the chemicals that relay messages in our nervous system. And probably the most famous of all of those neurotransmitters is serotonin. Everyone's heard of serotonin here, right? Because we normally think of it as like the feel-good neurotransmitter. So serotonin helps convey feelings of contentedness and happiness. It also conveys feelings of satiety. So satiety means how satisfied and full you feel when you eat. And astonishingly, the vast majority of the serotonin in your body is not made in your brain. 90% of it is produced in your enteric nervous system. And for a long time, people would say, oh, that's kind of a neat thing, but why is there all this serotonin there? There's no way that that serotonin is actually affecting your brain. And it's true, the serotonin actually has localized effects. So your gut is one long muscular tube, and as soon as you swallow, you give up conscious control of what's happening in the gut. And what you have is this rhythmic wave of muscular contraction called peristalsis. And that's what helps move food throughout your gut and on out of your gut. And it is actually serotonin that helps regulate that normal control of peristalsis, which is why if you suffer from depression and you're on a medication called an SSRI, which changes the balance of serotonin in your body, it's not just changing it in your brain, it's changing it in your gut. And it can alter the way that your gut moves. The other thing that's really cool about serotonin, and it starts to build this whole complex web of what's actually going on in our gut, is that when you have a bunch of nasty microbes in your system, like let's say you swallow some food that hasn't been cooked properly and there's a bunch of E. coli in it, if there's enough of those bad microbes, it's not actually your immune system that figures it out first. It's your nervous system. You have these cells in your gut called enterochromaffin cells, which we shorten to EC because it's way easier to say. They're filled with serotonin. And if they sense that there's a ton of disease-causing microbes, they actually flood the gut with serotonin to the point where, let's just say it floods something else on the way out. That's how your body expels an intense amount of pathogens. So there's this incredibly complex relationship between digestion and your nervous system and your immune system. And because there's so much going on in your second brain, it's also connected to your first brain by this information superhighway known as the vagus nerve. And note the spelling, vagus, not Vegas. Because unlike Vegas, what happens in the gut does not stay in the gut. And amazingly, in this information superhighway, there is messages coming top down. And we've totally entrenched this in our language. So even if you've never really thought about the idea of like the gut and the brain being connected, you've probably referred to it in ways you don't realize. Think of it this way. When you have a little bit of anxiety or something exciting is happening, you get butterflies in your stomach. That is a psychological emotion or thought process that's having a physiological impact on what's happening in your gut. Or if you're really stressed out or nervous because you have a big meeting or a review at work or an exam at school, and like exactly 5 minutes before you're supposed to do that really big important appointment, your gut decides to run you to the washroom instead of sitting there prepping and studying. That is what's happening in your brain going down into your gut. But the vast majority of messaging is actually coming from the bottom up. So the serotonin that is being produced and that is operating in the gut has an impact on the brain. In addition, you have all of these cool things like in the stomach you have stretch receptors. So when you eat a nice healthy meal filled with lots of plant fiber, your stomach physically stretches. The nervous system senses that and relays messages to your brain to say, okay, we're getting close to stomach capacity, maybe you need to slow down on the munching. And it lowers your appetite. This is also why you can sit down and eat like a whole bag of pirate's booty and not even notice that it happened. Why? Because you're essentially eating fatty air. There's nothing to stretch those stomach receptors. There's nothing to tell you that you actually ate anything. So when the bag just magically disappears beside you, you're like, that couldn't have been me. Like my brain is still like, I'm hungry, bring it on, I'm ready for dinner. So there's tons and tons of messaging coming up from the gut that impacts the way that your brain operates, but also creates feedback mechanisms to drive your behavior around food and eating. And it's really important to note it when we're talking about the brain and the gut, is that all this icky gut stuff is not just in your head. When you have celiac disease, although it may not feel like a blessing, in terms of gut stuff, it is a little bit of a blessing, because when you go to your doctor and you say, I'm worried that I might have celiac disease, there's a blood test that you can do to screen and be like, actually, you know what? Your antibodies are off the chart. Let's go do a scope. And when they look at the scope, you can actually see something physically change. The inflammation of celiac disease takes that nice, vast, velvety carpet and turns it into a bit of a nuclear wasteland. Your doctor knows with no uncertainty that something's gone wrong. But what if you have irritable bowel-like symptoms? They can be pretty subjective. You know, even what someone's definition of constipated, they're like, oh, I'm really constipated, or oh, things are like not so good down there in the opposite way, or I'm really bloated all the time. When you go to your GP with that, it's not easy. And for a long time, particularly when women were going, because it's so often women, they were told, you know what, it's all in your head. The gut looks fine. If you do a scope, the gut looks fine. There's no blood test to tell you that like, oh yeah, you must have IBS. But even though we now know, and care is getting better, that there is very real, very physiological things happening in the gut with respect to function, there is also a strong correlation between mental well-being and digestive health. So in my private practice, which is maybe, I don't know, 2/3 IBS and 1/3 Crohn's and colitis in terms of digestive health, I would say 90% of the people who come to me for digestive health concerns also have either depression or anxiety. And this starts to build a really strong case between the interactions between the first brain and the second brain. And in fact, one 2016 study found that in those with IBS, depression or anxiety were present in roughly half, not half of those who suffered from the symptoms. There was another really interesting trial that looked at both people who were initially diagnosed with depression and anxiety and people who initially received a diagnosis of IBS. They followed those people, those two camps, for 1 year. And within 12 months, the likelihood that if you were diagnosed with depression or anxiety, of you getting diagnosed with IBS was far, far higher than the average population. And the reverse was true. If you were diagnosed with IBS, the likelihood that you would be diagnosed with depression or anxiety in the next 12 months was extremely high. And so it's really important to note that when one thing is going on, we tend to study things in these silos, like this is your brain and this is your mental well-being and nothing else matters, or this is your gut and it has nothing to do with your heart or your brain. Your body kind of doesn't recognize these false borders. It's all connected. And I see this in my practice. Really great example is I have a client who is having trouble getting this very significant bloating under control. She also had rheumatoid arthritis. And I started asking her some probing questions, and she's like, you know what? That's really weird. Because as soon as I have a really bad bloating attack, my RA flares up really badly. Why is this happening? Because we also have to talk about the immune system in your digestive tract. 80% of your immune activity is centered in and around your gut. Why is that? Because you may not think of it this way, but your gut is actually a very critical barrier between you and the outside world. Your body encloses it, and except for the entrance, you probably don't have much visual perspective on what's going in your gut. But in fact, from entrance on through exit, it is continuous with the outside world. And so to your body, your gut is sort of like your skin. Except unlike your skin, it is absolutely critical that your gut be permeable enough to allow all of those supercritical vitamins and minerals and nutrients into your system while keeping all the disease-causing bad guys or toxic stuff out. So your gut is actually a very fragile barrier. And so it's in its infinite wisdom, your body places 80% of your immune activity in and around that barrier. And there's really only one cell standing between you and your immune system. And its first line of defense is inflammation. And so inflammation, when that's happening, because you have disease-causing microbes, or because you're super stressed out, or you have some sort of disease process going on that causes inflammation, it can impair the functioning of the enteric nervous system. And what's really crazy is it becomes this negative feedback loop. When you have chronic inflammation, it can alter the enteric nervous system. It can increase your levels of cortisol because they rise when you're inflamed. But cortisol, that chemical messenger of chronic stress, also then increases inflammation, and it just goes on and on and on unless you take steps to mitigate it. Oops. There we go. So we can't really talk about the gut without talking about what lives in the gut. And you have trillions of bacteria living in, mostly, hopefully, right here, your ascending colon. In fact, you have so many bacteria in there. There are more microbes living right here than there are stars in the Milky Way galaxy. But it's also not just bacteria in there. You actually have more viruses in there than you have bacteria. But they're kind of hard to study, and they're really tiny, and we can't really figure out how it all works yet. We know a lot more about the bacteria that live in your gut than we do about the viruses or the protozoa or even the fungi that live in there. If you've ever had a naturopath or someone talk to you about candida, for example, we get this idea that having fungus in our diet, even just saying that, you're like, I have fungus in my digestive tract. That doesn't sound nice, does it? But actually, when everything is in balance, having fungi in your digestive tract is not necessarily a bad thing. It's when the balance of good to maybe not so good is disrupted that you can potentially have overgrowths of species that you don't want in there. And bacteria, we think of them as not being us. But in fact, so much of what makes you human is thanks to your relationship with bacteria, which has evolved to make us more human than we ever thought possible. We're exposed to our first inoculation with bacteria through the birthing process. And it is those bacteria that start to help our immune systems to mature, our digestive systems to mature, and in fact, our nervous systems. So what do these little guys do? They help to produce vitamins. So they produce B vitamins by eating everything that you've essentially casted off, everything that you have not digested and absorbed that travels onto the colon. They ferment it, and in the process, they create vitamins. One that they produce is vitamin K, which is an important factor for bone health and blood clotting, but it's also an anti-inflammatory nutrient. In the food world, we get one form of vitamin K from eating all of our good green leafy vegetables, but fermentation in the gut produces vitamin K that we actually absorb into our system, and it helps to nourish us. In addition, when we have the right kind of bacteria in our gut, they produce short-chain fatty acids, which are exactly as they sound. They are acids, and so that production lowers the pH in the colon, which is a really good thing because a slightly lower pH helps to impact the growth of negative and potentially disease-causing bacteria, but that lower pH also makes it more possible for us to absorb calcium and iron, which if you have celiac disease, you know calcium and iron are really critical to staying well nourished with your disease. They also compete with harmful bacteria. So in addition to lowering pH, they have all of these little chemicals that are like little intracellular warfare to help make sure that the good guys get the foothold and stay strong, and the potentially disease-causing guys don't get the opportunity to start replicating out of control. But they're also not just hangers-on kind of owning that space. Think about it. You have 80% of your immune activity literally looking at trillions of bacteria. How do they not just want to try and kill them all? It's because the bacteria in your gut are educating and communicating with your immune system to literally say, like, I'm okay, that guy's not okay. Like, go check him out and leave me alone. They also interact with your nervous system. Certain probiotic bacteria that are natural to the human body produce neurotransmitters. So the chemicals that relay messages in your nervous system, bacteria also make them. It is one of the ways they communicate with each other, but there are bacteria in your gut right now, possibly making serotonin, possibly making GABA, which is the chill out neurotransmitter. There are bacteria that possibly make dopamine. Those little guys appear to like sugar. So if you get that nice little rush when you eat a donut, it's part of this dopamine reward pathway that occurs in the brain in response to your blood sugar rising. But the bacteria in the gut may also be using neurotransmitters to help ensure you eat what they like. So they may actually be part of triggering food cravings. And as a dietitian, this whole idea of how we eat and why we eat and what motivates our appetites and our food cravings is really complex. It's learned in our history. It's habitual, because we always reach for chocolate at 3 p.m., get a little boost, and you learn that the next time you need a boost, you eat chocolate. But the idea that bacteria could be helping to shape this complex web of food cravings is literally kind of mind-blowing. And what's very interesting, too, for me, because of the work that I do, bacteria are very implicated, and the immune system and the nervous system are very implicated in something we call leaky gut, or gut barrier dysfunction. And it's something we've been talking about in integrative health for a really long time, and it was poo-pooed. Interesting choice of words, but it was kind of poo-pooed for a long time by conventional science. And through our learning in celiac disease, actually, it really opened up our understanding of the physiology of how the gut barrier works. And that, in fact, sometimes the gut barrier isn't working as well as it could. So your immune system is being placed into interactions with fragments of stuff that it doesn't recognize, which may be part of why we seem to have intolerances to foods that are not strictly classical allergies. But in addition, this idea of inflammation in the body, bacteria should generally stay in your gut. But if your gut barrier is leaky, there is research starting to show that, in fact, in the joints of someone with inflammatory arthritis, or in the brains of someone with depression, there are bacterial fragments known as LPS, lipopolysaccharides, fatty sugars, essentially is what they are, that are causing inflammation away from the gut. So you see how taking care of your gut should be almost the first thing you do when it comes to caring for your overall health. So we say that you are what you eat. In health food, we also used to say, it's not just what you eat, it's what you absorb. But in fact, you are what you absorb, because those are the nutrients you use to build and repair. But what you do not absorb travels on through the gut, it lands here, and it is fermented. And different bacteria like different things. The good kind, the kind you really want to promote the growth of, they want you to eat as much plant fiber as humanly possible. They love fiber, they love fermenting it, and in the fermentation of fiber, they produce something called butyrate. Butyrate is a short-chain fatty acid, which is actually a primary substrate for the gut cell. So when you feed them, they feed you, and butyrate helps to nourish the gut tissues so it builds and repairs properly. But it also may have neurological effects systemically as well. So short-chain fatty acids are the primary energy source for the colon cell, and they contribute to energy, but they're also what's changing the pH. So eat more fiber. If there's one thing you take away from this talk, good bacteria like fiber. On a gluten-free diet, you need to be wary of this. We need to shift to more whole grain gluten-free items, more quinoa, more millet, more sorghum. Sorry, less white rice. It's just got to happen because you need to nourish those gut bacteria. And I always like to touch on prebiotics because there's actually quite a decent body of literature showing that when you feed the body prebiotics, which are indigestible carbohydrates, that you can actually boost the growth of bacteria. However, when you have digestive issues, there's a practical problem with this. The literature suggests that you need to take between 5 and 20 grams of prebiotic fibers a day, so that's like inulin, like the benefiber stuff. If you have gut health issues and you take, 10 to 15 grams of prebiotic fibers, you're probably not going to want to leave the bathroom in depending on your gut, between 4 and 12 hours from now. So I tend to recommend in my practice that people just focus on a broad spectrum of healthy, high-fiber plant foods as opposed to supplementing with a prebiotic. And if you were here for the FODMAPs talk, and hopefully you were, I just touch briefly on this because in irritable bowel syndrome, we have this amazing dietary approach called the low FODMAP protocol. And it works like a hot damn. But it also works by augmenting the bacteria that live in your gut. So as you start to learn more about FODMAPs, do not necessarily assume that FODMAPs are a bad thing. You want to know why? They feed your gut bacteria. It's apples, pears, garlic, onions, they're all things that if you can get your gut symptoms under control without going low FODMAP, that's a wonderful thing. If you need low FODMAP and it's there for you, it is also an incredible life-changing thing. But don't automatically discount FODMAPs as being something you have to get rid of if you have any sort of digestive issue. And as part of eating all that plant fibers, I always take an anti-inflammatory approach. No one meal will make anything better, nor will no one meal make everything worse. Your health is determined by how you eat day in, day out, over weeks and months and years. And so this is the approach that I like to take. What is it? Lots of plant foods. Lots and lots of whole plant foods, fiber-rich, filled with phytochemicals. Do not be afraid of healthy plant fats. Eat avocados and olive oil and olives and nuts and seeds. And then let's talk a little bit just about probiotics, because I always get questions, and I use probiotics with most of my digestive health clients. There is a massive gulf between the potential we see for probiotics in the research and what is actually available in the marketplace. So I recommend that anyone who is interested in probiotics avoid all the beautiful marketing and go straight to a website called probioticchart.ca. It's not perfect, but it is the best resource we have because it is third-party, independent, peer-reviewed, and it will tell you all the probiotics on the market in Canada that have actual clinical research to show that they work. You will be surprised at how small the list is. Probiotics are investment, and they can change lives. Don't waste your money on something made by a company that isn't doing the research. A little bit to look at there. But if you go to Probiotic Chart, you'll get everything you need. And in terms of fine-tuning, know that how you eat is the largest determinant of your health. But for some people, additional supplementation can really be beneficial. I'm a big believer in vitamin D because it's an important immunomodulator. Psyllium is like magical fairy dust for your gut. If things are too fast, it helps to slow them down. If things are too slow, it helps to speed them up. For the right person, it makes me look like a genius when I'm like, here's some cheap psyllium, and the people are like, oh my gosh, everything is better. So I want to talk quickly about the HPA axis because all of my clients come through my office knowing. No one says that being under a lot of stress is a good thing. No one thinks of it as a good thing. But people greatly underestimate the physiological impact of being stressed out. For example, you can do all the diet stuff right. you can be active, and you can have an intense stressor that is enough to initiate a flare-up of your IBS, of your Crohn's, your colitis. Nothing else has changed in your life except a massive stressor. What happens here goes here, and vice versa. And part of it is because of the communication of something called the HPA axis. So the hypothalamus and the pituitary are parts of your brain. The adrenals are these lumpy glands sitting on top of your kidneys, which release cortisol. So we need to know that you have to manage stress as part of any gut health strategy. Just food may be enough, it likely won't be. Just exercise contributes, but it's not going to be everything. You have to think about how to manage stress. So I'm going to do this next, but here's what you can do. Identify what de-stresses you. Even if you work all the time, even if you have 2 kids who are like, am I describing my own life? Yes, I am. You can figure out something. Is it a hot bath? Is it waking up before the rest of the household for 15 minutes of silence? That's my 2018 resolution. It's changing my life, by the way. Get outside and get off your screens. These little screens are hardwiring our brains in a way that we don't want. And when we're stressed out, we typically escape into our phones. They are making it worse, not better. Try and get rid of your screens at least a couple hours a day. And also, when you're really stressed out, consider actually talking to a professional. There is evidence to show that if you have irritable bowel-like symptoms, talk therapy helps you get them under control. Why? Because what happens here affects here, and vice versa. So take a holistic approach. The gut-brain is the ultimate mind-body connection. You got to do it all. You have to make space in your life for movement, for stress reduction, eat tons of high-fiber foods, and probably take a probiotic, at least for a little while. So I want to thank BioK Plus Probiotics and the Gluten-Free Expo for bringing me here for this talk. And then I think, do I have a minute for the breath exercise?
You absolutely do.
All right,
I love
so
this,
I want to do something with you that I do with all of my digestive health clients called square breathing. I love it because it's free. It takes a minute. You can do it anywhere, and no one will know you're doing it. But it helps to take down the effects of stress on your gut and improve things. So if you want, close your eyes, but you're not doing anything. It's not like a yoga pose or anything, so you can keep them open if you want. And all we're gonna do is breathe, and we're gonna breathe into a square. So we're gonna take an inhale together. So inhale, and we're gonna inhale for 2, 3, 4, and then you're gonna hold the inhale, 2, 3, 4. Now exhale, 2, 3, 4, and hold the exhale, 2, 3, 4. Let's do one more round. Inhale, 2, 3, 4, hold, 2, 3, 4, exhale, 2, 3, 4, and hold, 2, 3, 4. Easy, right? If you have gut health issues, try and do a minute of that before every meal. You can use it anywhere, do it anytime. You just need like a little 60-second mental yoga break. And believe me, it does have an impact the more consistent you are with it. So thank you so very much for your kind attention. I will stay for questions, if not here, over on the side so I can be out of the way for the next speaker. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you, guys. Please put your hands together for Desiree. And as it turns out, we do have a few minutes for questions. So I'm thinking 5 will be our lucky number. So the first 5 hands, oh, I knew it. This is like yesterday. I'm like, we're not going to be able to get to everyone.
Do you have your practice in Vancouver?
Yes, my private practice is in Vancouver. I see people virtually and also in office near Oak and Broadway, and I have a location in West Vancouver as well. There's two dietitians in my practice, just to help, grow things.
Online by your
DesireeRD.com.
Okay.
There's a contact form, so you can email me, and yes, it's actually me that reads the emails. So yeah, sometimes I'm a little slow, but it's me.
All right, any other questions? Hands up. Oh.
What are your favorite books on gut health?
Oh, what are my favorite books on gut health? Yeah, a lot. So prescriptive ones that you can actually take away things that you can input in your life. The Inside Tract by Gerard Mullen and Kathy Madonna Swift. It's a little bit older, but you will learn so much. Gut Bliss by Robin Chutkin totally changed how I practice, actually. There's some amazing insights in that book. And if you're really like this gut-brain geeky stuff, The Psychobiotic Revolution is a brand new book. I'm already 3/4 of the way through it. Really beautifully told, really weaves everything into a very understandable story of just the intricacy and complexity of all this stuff. Super. If you're super geeky, that's what I do, is I sit in the bath and I read The Psychobiotic Revolution. Yeah.
It is so great too. Speaking of less screen time, reading is such a great way.
Like an actual paper book. Try it, folks. It's genius.
Nothing against Kindle, but you know. Any other questions? Hands up. Oh, right in the back. It's going to get a close-up on that camera.
If dinner had to be the same for you for the rest of your life, what would you have?
Oh, good. If I had to eat one dinner for the rest of my life, like with zero changes, like I have to, zero changes. Okay, so I would probably do some sort of seasoned base of lentils. I love lentils, super high fiber, high protein, and they carry flavor well. With a topping of greens, if I have to choose one, I'll do kale. Let's be cliche. So like lentils and kale and like a half a sliced avocado. Yeah.
Who else is going to make that for dinner tonight? Anybody? Inspiring all of us. Okay, 2 more questions. Anne's perfect.
What are the pros and cons of being a dietitian?
Oh, pros and cons of being a dietitian. I feel like maybe there are literally zero cons, except if you don't like food or talking about like weird gut things, then maybe that's a big con. What I love about being a dietitian is that it provides me with the opportunity, to engage with something that everyone is endlessly fascinated. Like if you go and meet people for the first time, they're like, oh, you're a dietitian? I have a question for you. Like you can talk endlessly about food and nutrition and health. It's an amazing connection to people. But one of the things I love most about being a dietitian is that, in fact, when I went into dietetics, I went in with the intention to become a physician, actually, an integrative physician. Because I really believed in the power of lifestyle to help people not just live an unsick life, but a really vibrant and healthy life. And throughout my program, as I learned more about the realities of practicing medicine in Canada and how I wanted to practice, what I realized is being a dietitian allowed me to do so much of what I wanted to do as a physician in terms of helping people live on a day-to-day basis in a way that brought them joy through delicious food, but also an amazing amount of healing too. So yeah, I think that would be, yeah.
And how lucky are we that we basically just got a free session with Desiree? Am I right? Yes. All right, and one last question. First hand I see shoot up. All right, I think that's it, everybody.
Amazing. If you have any other questions, I'll peek around the side, but thank you so much. Enjoy all the yummy stuff at the show.
Yes, go eat and come back here in about 10 or 15 minutes. We have 2 presentations left for the entire weekend. That is it. So make sure you get your seat. They will fill up. And thank you once again, everybody.